Did you know that there is only one habitat in the world from proboscis monkeys in zoos that we can take inspiration from? Well, I think that's enough to actually do exactly this. We are going to build a realistic habitat for proboscis monkeys. In today's part 1, you'll see all the background information, all the stuff that is needed to understand why this is such a special build, and definitely amongst my best builds I've ever done, thanks to the Twitch chat, by the way. And also in tomorrow's second part, so you will have part 1 today, part 2 tomorrow, so stick with me, that's important. You will learn how this impacts the whole building process if you only have one inspiration source. Now, let's get going, because this is potentially one of the hardest builds I've ever done. There are a couple of things I had in mind during the process of thinking to do this. So let's start at the very beginning. We had a Twitch live stream in which I was like, you know what, we should do a realistic habitat again. I haven't done this in months. So just to give you a little bit of context, this is a project within my realistic habitat zoo. It's not a zoo per se. We did find a name for it. If you're interested in that, very good name, I should say. I'm gonna mention that later in today's video. But the whole idea of this zoo at the beginning was to improve my realism building skills. As you know, I try to build realistic on the shell, on the outside, but I'm very much not always going this extra mile in terms of backstage and blah blah blah, what you'll never see. So I kind of agreed with myself that at least the habitat itself should be very much also in terms of if they could escape and whatnot. Now, as we started the live stream, I had no idea exactly which one I wanted to start with. I had a couple of ideas. For example, we had the meerkat also in the challenge, and we also had a couple of kitties in there as well. But the people just said, also the Bengal tiger was amongst this list. But the people did vote for the Proboscis monkey, which I also integrated into the list because I thought I've never really built anything for this one except the more likely natural habitat in Kuala Zoo, which was meant to be the actual environment rather than a zoo habitat, which Mike did actually turn into a habitat then, but never mind this. So we did this poll in the live stream, so just a hint to you guys, if you want to be part of the process of doing stuff like this, you better would be in the live streams, because then you can keep on voting. I will do the exact same with the next realistic habitat, by the way. I'm going to announce this earlier on, and so you guys can then have a little stroll in the poll, I guess. But yeah, the Proboscis monkey was voted, and naive and silly as I am, I thought there will be a couple of habitats in the world, and quickly people in the chat were mentioning, hahaha, lol, blah blah blah, this is gonna be a fun one because there's only a Singapore zoo that has actually a habitat for them. There used to be a second one, which we also used for a couple of inspiration, but the animals are gone for over 10 years now, so it's not existing anymore. So Singapore Zoo remains the only active, or the single active habitat that we can draw inspiration from. But as always, I wanted to kind of get my own spin on this. And so the main idea about this habitat was to create a very nice island on which they can roam around and climb to the outside. And then we have this overhanging viewing platform over here as the main kind of eye catcher of this build. So this thing is going to go through a couple of iterations throughout the build, just to mention this right away. And we also have a very realistic system of like electric wires and stuff later on to prevent the animals from escaping, because maybe one of the most interesting facts about Proboscis monkey is that they used to be very good in climbing and jumping. Now, what they do in real life is they just climb all the way up into the trees, and from there they do some actual crazy jumps into rivers to already kind of get very far into the river in order to not need to swim that much more, because in those rivers where they usually live in their real environment, there are like crocodiles and stuff that basically want to kill them for breakfast. So in order to not end up as a tasty breakfast, they want to cross the river as fast as possible, and apparently jumping into the water from a huge height grants them already like a little bit of an advantage in distance. So that's what they do, but that also means they fear no man and they fear no jump. So at the end of the day, in zoos you would need to have a good system in which that they prevent them from jumping into something, especially water. And once they are in the water, as they can swim pretty well, you have to also ensure that they can't swim out of it. Just to mention that already as a little challenge. A second challenge I put myself upon is I wanted to also give props to the whole community of Planet Zoo. I mean, I'm very much loving the fact that a lot of you guys love my stuff, that I get so many nice comments which really make my day. It really feels good, but we also have to be true to what's also existing out there, and there are a lot of other good creators that have unique skill sets, and I want to mention especially two of them. The one being Lighter. He's potentially the one with the craziest usage of pieces and stuff. He always has a good vision of how to use pieces to create something very clean and realistic looking. And then we have, for example, Caesar Crates. He has a very distinctive, unique style in doing realistic natural areas, I want to call them. It's very interesting to see how he manages to basically capture an essence of a style and put that into any kind of natural environment. And what I mean by that is like really how he's using different clutters and plants and grass and stuff like that to create a very, I would in the first glance call it overdone ground texture, but it looks freaking realistic. And I wanted to create something like this in my own style this time around. And I can already tell you, spoiler for tomorrow's episode, I think I very well succeeded, and this might actually be one of the habitats or one of the builds where I personally learned the most. I learned to get out of my comfort zone and try to utilize even more different techniques in order to create something. The only issue I have with that one is it is again a absolute FPS killer, because the amount of pieces you need to use to make it look that way is freaking ridiculous. And I wanna just admit that I feel very good in that way, that I learned to build with less pieces and still remain a certain level of detail in the past month and even years, I should say. I found some very good techniques in order to reach a minimum level of detail that looks freaking good, but at the same time doesn't utilize a million pieces to achieve something that, like, don't get me wrong, but that only looks a couple % better than what I did with a huge amount of less pieces, I should say. It's always like this kind of juggle. If we would have infinite, calculation power, and if the optimization was so good that it doesn't matter, obviously it's always better to use more pieces. But if you look at this build specifically, you will see how many pieces I used to create something very nice looking. I think this shoreline did give you an idea what I meant by saying I used a lot of pieces. So as you have seen, I used this stalactite or stalagmite piece, whatever, from the Twilight pack, and turned that around and used this as like a little eroded kind of area for the water. Like this is like the stone that gets eroded. I kind of drew some inspiration from Haribo's insane builds. He's also the master of these kind of river lines and stuff, where the water would have over time obviously eroded the stone a little and stuff like that. Even in zoos, if that's like an older habitat, that would happen. So it's not crazy, but so you have this little bit of texture there. But you've seen how many of those pieces I have just put to the shoreline to make it look that realistic. And in fact, you don't really see it so much from the side. It looks good, obviously, but you don't really know why it looks good. But then you have used a million pieces. That is definitely one of the things I learned, that I just keep on adding pieces and it keeps on looking better, obviously. But then again, it also actually is a huge amount of pieces that you use in there. But anyways, I set myself this challenge, so I have to fulfill that. And also we will, in the next episode, we will also tackle the inside or the indoor section. We will have, I didn't talk about that quite yet, but the indoor section is the second part of this build. Now, as for the climate that they're living in usually, this is a temperate zoo. So most of the year they should be fine to live outside, but we still have a winter that they definitely wouldn't be able to live here. So the amount of square meters required for them is met. However, I should say that in the Singapore Zoo they have about 35 square meters indoors, which is good because their climate is basically for the whole year, apart from some rainy monsoon areas, they can live outside, which is different here. So the indoor section needs to be a bit bigger. I'm not 100% finished. Maybe, just maybe, we're going to stream the rest tonight. If not, we're going to stream tomorrow evening with a different topic then. I'll let you know in the other video then. But just so you know, you should better already check on the Twitch channel, follow if you haven't already followed there, to ensure that you're there and see when I'm live, because we will do some other cool stuff in there. We might also need to talk about Planet Coaster, eventually Planet Coaster 2. There are some very good hints we should discuss if you guys are in for Planet Coaster. There is a little bit of hope for us, I guess. Not more, but not less. We should discuss that in the live stream. I didn't want to make that part of today's discussion. However, as you can tell, this is the electric wire I'm putting in. We connect that to the wall with some little pipes, and we even have an insulation, which is important because, like, it's close to the water. We don't want to have that problems, especially with the maintenance. That wouldn't be too easy. And this is obviously here to keep them away from going towards the wall and climb them, because you always have to think, like, realistically, there would be cracks in the concrete, like weather creates different textures and stuff. So technically they could climb there, or maybe they can jump there and climb there. So it is actually important to keep them away from the concrete wall in order to make sure they don't try even to climb there. And also the other way is to make them not jump straight over there. So that makes sense to just ensure they don't. And the last thing we're doing in today's video is preparing the climbing frames, because we will have, and you've seen that from the thumbnail, we will have a lot of climbing. My god, will we have a lot of climbing, because these are arboreal animals and they spend a huge amount of time in the trees and just climbing and swinging and jumping and whatnot. It's a pity that we don't have brachiation and stuff for them. We had like a nice discussion about the fact if they do actually do brachiate, and I know it's per definition not, but they do have a certain overhang climbing ability, and just like swinging and jumping is a thing. And yeah, we use these dead trees as a foundation until we figured what I always tend to forget, that these things are non-climbable pieces, which is a weird thing, but they are not. And so what we did is we built custom trees, which like custom dead trees, which I will definitely put on the workshop. I think they turned out quite well. Not too many of those. We are going to copy a couple of those, but I think they look fantastic. And they look, which is equally the name of the zoo, they look Rudilistic. This is a term Chat came up with, and it's the perfect description of what we're doing. We are building a somewhat realistic thing, which still leaves a little bit of room for my personal, you know, craziness and creativity going in. And so it is the Rudilistic zoo, because it is not like super realistic, but it's realistic enough to be a realistic thing, so it's Rudilistic. Huh? But yeah, so I guess I will put this as Rudilistic climbing frames in or something like that. But that should be that from my side. As you can see, these are the last preparations for tomorrow's video. This one is a shorter one to get in, almost like a extended trailer. And tomorrow we are going to have a little finishing section, but I'm going to include some wonderful cinematic shots now, so that should make you happy. Thank you so much for watching, as always, and as always, if you want to help me grow, please consider subscribing to the channel. Still, there are over 50% watching these videos without being subbed, and I know you still get the videos. For you, it doesn't really make a difference because you have them on your timeline anyways, but for me, it's a huge difference because that tells YouTube that the content is appreciated, and it will tell the algorithm to push it more. So that would be lovely if you could consider subscribing if you haven't already, or please check if you're just by any chance not subscribed even though you thought you are. That'll help me out a lot. And now I wish you a wonderful Friday. Hope you see you tomorrow again in the second part, and until then, have a good time and goodbye.